Thank you very much, John, for your introduction and for the invitation. It's a real honor to be here and a pleasure with you all. I am talking to you from Spain, yes, the Basque country. So kind of, if I can tell you why I am writing on terrorism, counterterrorism, is because being a Basque anthropologist, I use myself drawn into issues of political violence. We had here in the Basque country our own issue of political violence, political terrorism, the usual nationalist claims, the sub-state versus a state type of conflicts that are typical, but which also tell us how these issues are global in many ways. And so the thoughts we are sharing here, they are thoughts that apply here. And well, in the meantime, I have been an academic writer at the University of Nevada, at the Center for Basque Studies. And this studying the Basque political terrorism drove me into considering the issues of counterterrorism, which are so paramount in the United States. So I've been writing on this the last 30, 40 years. And the last book, in a way, was kind of forced on me by my living there, since it is from Las Vegas that many of these drones are operated, as you probably know, and it was the fact that I met courageous people like Ricky. They were kind of former drone pilots turned whistleblowers, and their testimony that I heard from them in Las Vegas that kind of forced me to write this book on drones, kind of sort of wearing witness to their courage and to their truth. And so that forced on me all sort of dilemmas, because the reality they express is so different from the reality that the general public lives on. I heard this, one of them was Sean Westmoreland, of the famous Westmoreland family, the general of the Vietnam War, kind of his grand uncle. And he gave us a talk in Las Vegas after protesting at Creech, where he said, well, in 2009, I helped kill 359 civilians. So he considered himself a mass murderer. So I had that kind of experience that I couldn't not write about. Obviously, I mean, that is not a news that you will read in the New York Times. It was the very year that his boss, Obama, got the Nobel Peace Prize, as you will remember. Obama, who at the end of his tenure, second administration, he said that there were between 64 and 116 people, civilians, who had died during his 8 years in power. In just this 1 year, he was talking. There was another whistleblower, Brandon Bryant, whose scorecard when he was relieved because of his trauma, it was 1,630 some people he had killed or helped kill. So these whistleblowers kind of became for me the truth of what the drone warfare is. So the issue was, how is it that the politicians and the media, including the liberal media, can go along with all the line that goes with the military, like we have seen now in Afghanistan, 20 years of sheer total ignorance of what we were doing, and of lying and lying and lying. So that was the issue that I tried to elucidate. How is it this willingness to self-delude that the public and we in general have, and the politicians have? So I'll be talking a little bit on the situation in which Biden is right now faced with, Lindsay started talking about this, how there in 85 countries there are these drone warfare. I think that in a way the drone warfare summarizes a good part of the actual situation in which he's confronted right now. I am, in principle, I am very sympathetic to Biden. Obviously, those of us who have gone through these last years, we want him to succeed. And he has surprised us with his really progressive agenda of, I mean, the war on terror has spent like close to what, 6 trillion, depending on how you count, in this war on terror, and just 300 billions a day in 20 years in Afghanistan, 300 billions. So he is trying to apply the Bernie Sanders kind of progressive agenda. Said, I'm putting kind of 5-6 trillion now in infrastructure, human infrastructure. So I really applaud him for that and wish him the best. But the one really concerning thing for me is precisely what he's going to do with drones. Is he going to be fooled like Obama was? That's how I consider Obama's Troy, his self-fulfilling folly in a way, and the stigma that we live in, his legacy, because he this is a low body count kind of thing. So as Lindsay said, it is today's news that the Pentagon acknowledges August 19 drone strike in Afghanistan was a tragic mistake that killed 10 civilians. So, so what does this mean? Is the Biden administration going to continue the drone warfare that began with President Bush, then was multiplied by Obama and Trump? Is he going to continue? I think this is the dilemma you are faced at right now. After the withdrawal, if you remember, Biden said that he would use the so-called over-the-horizon capabilities, meaning drones and missiles, against the terrorist threat. He has also said repeatedly that he wants to end the forever wars. Engaging in drone warfare is not a way to end those wars, but as proven by the effects of 20 years of such warfare, a means to further ignite wars. Terrorism, counterterrorism has this self-fulfilling capacity. And if you think of it, I mean, starting with the war in Iraq and in Afghanistan and the others, ISIS, those wars were in a way an overreaction to 9/11. They were kind of self-fulfilling prophecies and self-defeating events in a massive, massive scale, like in no other in the history of the U.S. militarism. So there is the thing that he wants to end this, but he's not the first one to have said that. Obviously, since Clinton's time, every president, Obama, of course, but also Trump, they said they wanted to end the war, and they did not end up doing the war, which is why I applaud Biden, who had the guts of, against the wish of the military and the Washington establishment of foreign affairs, against, he had the courage to, however unruly and chaotic, he had the courage to stick to his decision and get out. Obviously, if you are spending $300 billion daily in Afghanistan, you are not going to have those 6 trillion you need for infrastructure at home. Is kind of a common sense thing, and common sense thing that somebody like Eisenhower, I mean, very plainly said, no? I mean, the danger of the industrial military that we are so aware of. So hence the dilemma of Biden. Ending the forever wars implies substantively ending the drone warfare as well. And yet, when faced with criticism from all sides because of the chaotic withdrawal from Kabul and no longer having any boots on the ground, he was left with no other self-defense but to resort to the future use of drones to fend off the terrorist threat. Is he going to continue that war? So, and he authorized this drone strike with the tragic consequences of 10 civilians dead in Kabul that we know. So does this anticipate that Biden is going to go along the same path as Obama's deceitful and horrendous drone warfare, a murderous history I have labeled Obama's Troy, the stain in his legacy, Obama's self-defeat? Many of us look at Biden as the one hope against the return of Trumpism and wish him the best. He has surprised many of us who were not for him initially after his history of agreeing with all the wars that came along during his decades at the Senate. In particular, his leading the Democratic support for the Iraq war. If he succeeds with his progressive agenda, he might become a transformational president. And he has been equally courageous in withdrawing from Afghanistan, something Obama and Trump promised as well, but didn't dare to do. During his first year in office, under pressure from his generals and the CIA, Obama authorized the search of 30,000 more troops for the war in Afghanistan. The only one who opposed the search was Biden, who by then had his own son fighting in Iraq, who later died, as you know. At the end of the meeting and before Obama had to make the decision, Biden addressed him, "Listen to me, boss. Maybe I have lived too long in this town, but if there is anything I know is when these generals try to box in a new president, don't let them jam you." 12 years later, Biden was in a similar situation as Obama had been, in that the generals were asking him to leave a few thousand troops in Afghanistan. Biden said no. The military and the Washington policy establishment, including the so-called liberal media that has been happy to act as cheerleader for all the military follies of the last 30 years, didn't like his determination and vociferously opposed him. So is Biden going to repeat Obama's self-deception that drones are, after all, as his speechwriter and close advisor, Ben Rose, put it, a low body count? In other words, if Bush's conventional wars killed by the hundreds of thousands, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq have resulted in estimated million deaths, as I'm sure you are aware. The few thousands of alleged terrorists killed by drones were a low body count to keep the military at bay, and by the way, reinforce the image of a tough president for the next elections. While Biden also be cornered into a position in which he will have to produce a low body count and end up with another Troy of self-delusion and self-defeat. This is, of course, the last thing we want. The August 29 drone attack on Kabul and Biden's words the day after the withdrawal do not bode well. But let's not jump into conclusions yet, because up to now, Biden's drone policy has shown a stark contrast to Obama's. Not yet 72 hours into his presidency, Obama had authorized a drone strike that killed 23 people, of them possibly 20 civilians, the first 3 days. He's been bloody like you would a hunting dog, a former White House official said, capturing the significance of the moment for Obama. Obama engaged right away in multiplying by 10 the drone program he inherited from the Bush administration. Biden, on the contrary, during the first 8 months of his mandate, has paused the drone program while putting it under review. You put under review something you don't fully agree with. Only in self-defense can a strike be carried out. And in late July and early August, 3 attacks were carried out in Somalia against Al-Shabaab with the excuse that they were in self-defense. what are the expected changes in drone policies after the still ongoing review? According to press reports, there are significant changes. One of them goes at the heart of what is called signature strikes, that is, strikes on the basis of geography, pattern of life, or guilt by association. Specifically, any man between 16 and 60 years old was a legitimate target over large swath of territory in Afghanistan, Pakistan, or wherever counterterrorism deemed it so, in which some type of war was being waged. Unless posthumously proven the contrary, any man was a potential combatant terrorist and counted as such. This was responsible in good part for the stark disparities in counting between the Western sources and the local reports in those places. Uh, we have been told during the Obama years that there was hardly any civilian killed by drone attacks. As I said, he said that there have been only between 64 and 116 civilians in his two administration. But if you pay attention even to the Pentagon generals, such as David Kilcullen, a counterterrorist guru, close associate of General David Petraeus in the search to end the war in Iraq, and someone who knew well the situation, he told the Congress in April of 2009, quote, "Since 2006, we have killed 14 senior Al-Qaeda leaders using drone strikes. 14, 1-4. During those years, of course, several thousand people have been killed. 14 were, so the military, they know well how many, they were 14 in those first 4 or 5 years. In, in the same period, we have killed 700 Pakistani civilians in the same area, he said. The drone strikes are highly unpopular. They are deeply aggravating to the population, and they have given rise to a feeling of anger that coalesces the population around the extremists and leads to spikes of extremism. The current path that we are on is leading us to loss of Pakistani government control over its population. The ratio of 50 civilians killed for each militant is, for Kilcullen, immoral and leads to a self-generating process of further violence, a view reiterated in other internal CIA documents. This self-generating, self-fulfilling prophecy of terrorism, they are quite aware. There are many different numbers about this thing, but it has been for me key to see how we see that the US and the Western media can be so blind to this reality. Like, I mean, the best cited, most cited database is the London based Bureau of Investigative Journalism. For them, the Bureau estimates that between, as of June of 2018, there have been between 7,800 and 11,000 people killed by American drones in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Yemen, and Somalia. Of these, between 750 and 1,500, following their own definitions, are civilians. Among these, 262 to 335 are children. Some Western estimates put the number of combatants among the dead at about 85%, but a very different picture calculation is given by the Pakistani media. For example, the Daily Dawn estimated of the 708 people killed by drones in 2009 alone, only 5 were non-militants, 5 out of these 700. And other sources repeat this kind of thing. And there are even some well-informed Western sources which concur with Kilcullen 50 to 1 estimate. For example, the report Living Under Drones, the very cited report by the Stanford Human Rights and Conflict Resolution Clinic and the NYU School of Law's Global Justice Clinic in 2000, they conformed to these findings for Pakistan, quote, "The number of high-level targets killed as a percentage of total casualties is extremely low, estimated at just 2%, and other sources." So how is it that, well, the whole media will make you believe that there are only a very small handful Like, I mean, Obama 64, which means in his 8 years, that was what, like 10, less than 10 per year. Here you have it. I mean, of the 1,800, only five, or the 2%. How we see that the media goes, that is where we need to kind of understand how through narrative, through self-deceptions, through we just don't want to know, through this kind of what the Lacanian psychologists say, the passion for ignorance. We don't want to know, not because we don't know, but because we don't want to know, because knowing it will be too painful. So this deliberate not wanting to know. No. I just told you before about how Sean Westmoreland and Brandon Bryan, what they told me. No? So whom do you believe? Do you believe them, or do you believe Obama saying they were 64, or these pilots who are totally traumatized, severely traumatized, because they saw that they were actually killing ordinary people with their children, or they were normal dads playing with their. I mean, so this is the reality which you can deceive yourself that this is just a low body count after all. We are not killing tens of thousands. It's just a few hundred. It's just a few thousand. No? So how is it that the same killings that might severely traumatize these pilots because they can see with their own eyes that they are overall murdering ordinary people, including many children, can be classified by counterterrorism with the acquiescence of the media that they are practically all terrorists? Here comes the power of euphemisms such as targeted killing instead of murder or assassination, as well as perverse notions such as signature strike, by which any man in a theater of war, which included most of the territory in Afghanistan and Pakistan, is deemed to be combat territory. So, so the new drone policy emerging under the Biden administration will have reviewed the civilian casualty rates, as well as will assess the evolution of the global terrorist threat. So there are going to be these changes. Specifically, it is not going to consider men differently from women and children. The safeguards against civilian bystander death will be the same. That is, they will not be deemed to be automatically drone targets. This is a drastic change from the Obama and Trump policies. So in the new playbook, it is expected that these signature strikes by which they could just kill any man and they were all combatant terrorists is not going to happen. They're going to look into this. There will be also other safeguards, such as the need to get permission from the local head of the State Department before a strike. It used to be, there are many cases in Pakistan, etc., where the ambassador would not approve, but the CIA went along and they had authority to overrule the ambassadors and the people from the State Department. There will be also restrictions as to when an attack should be deemed to be in self-defense and so on. So there are going to be differences. And as I said, for the first 8 months, it is on pause. So Biden has not jumped into the drone warfare like Obama did from the very first week. He has only authorized this disastrous one, and let's hope he learns the lesson. And the other thing, the other major difference in today's news is that it's an attack that for once the New York Times investigated, because that was the other thing. There were local sources saying, well, they are all civilians. I mean, there were hundreds of those cases, very obvious, but the media could not go there. The Western media could not go. Either the American army wouldn't let them, or they would just not go there. And the Western media, they don't believe any local third world country sources if they are not themselves there, or they don't have several of them. So they said they were civilians, but we cannot prove. For the first time, the New York Times has made an investigation, and it was obvious that what the local people said, these were just civilians, a family of civilians. They were not related to ISIS in any way. They had no bombs, something that was obvious from the very beginning. But the Pentagon began lying as usual. So this investigation is already a big difference. And the recognition that it was a mistake, a public apology, and promise of reparations. This had never happened under Obama. I mean, they knew they had killed hundreds, thousands of innocent civilians, but never ever one reparation, never ever one apology. There was one case of two white journalists, one Italian and another, that Obama apologized for those two, but never for these thousands of victims that, I mean, so it was always assumed that the imperial powers don't apologize for their mistake nor make reparations, nor we should subject themselves to an international court of justice. As we know, is the United States is the only one of the major countries that is not in this international court. So the recent events during the withdrawal from Afghanistan have reminded the public at the same time that the terrorist threat is real. Having brought home the troops, Biden was compelled to say that he had his capabilities over the horizon, adding, which means to say we can strike terrorists and targets with our American boots on the ground. Very few if needed, very few if needed, he said. What we don't know yet is to what extent and how he will use drones, but let's hope that this remark, very few is needed, is the case. So, as we know, after the 9/11, Bush declared that the new kind of warfare required, quote, us to be on an international manhunt. While Rumsfeld asked, how do we organize the Department of Defense for manhunts? Researchers called for a national manhunting agency, manhunting perfected and most of all made invisible. Hunter-killer drones are an instrument of such manhunting, so asymmetrical that it is more like hunting than war. So there is a sense in which, I mean, the traditional type of warfare conducted by the militaries has its rules, has its ethical things, has its conventions, but this new type of drone warfare is in a way much more problematic, ethically, legally. It doesn't respect anything, and these dozen of thousands people killed by drone warfare in these last 20 years, I mean, they have received no protection from any of the military conventional rules by which you could just surrender, etc., etc. They were, many of them, of course, they had no burial, they had no respect of anything. They were just bare life. They were just total reality. And so there is a sense in which this the liberal excuse for Obama's behavior and etc. is, after all, well, he just killed a few thousand. I mean, you're not going to compare with the million that killed the Bush's two wars. I mean, this is just a few thousand, but there is a sense in which these thousands were ethically and militarily, legally, politically, morally, were in a way, they are more problematic because they are done with no behavior, no rule of any kind. And so that's where kind of the savagery of comes, the monstrosity of it comes. No, and I guess my time is up. I could go on about how much this is based on the fantasy of militarism that is typical of the military, but in this case it's just atrocious. And the fantasy of the headhunter who believes that, I mean, at Creech, where John and I have been many times, I mean, at the door, the entrance is home of the hunters, and they are called themselves hunters. So this is hunting not in any metaphoric way, of course. It is real hunting in which your victim is an animal-like terrorist, is not a true human being. So you don't have to talk to him, you don't have to understand him, you just have to eliminate him. And this hunting worldview has its own fantasy that is not going to come to bite you back. It's not going to, and the reality is that these drone pilots, and many of them become totally traumatized when they see what they are doing. Because on the one hand, it is such a decent, but on the other hand, through the eye in the sky of the drone, they see them, they see their body parts, they see the children they live there. Uh, they see cases like, wow, there was one child that his father was all broken into his body parts. So he tried to put together the body parts. These pilots see those things. So, so in that regard, this is the kind of, so what I'm just hoping is that, Biden had the courage in a way to get out of Afghanistan and to resist the military calls. And while talking about that, he said, and I don't know why it is, maybe it's bold and then brain to, and Biden totally convinced that that tumor was the result of his service in Iraq. So this presence of his dead son, I think, made him more aware of the kind of folly that it is. And of course, he was there many times. And why are we there? There was never any explanation. And the generals themselves, if you hear the stories, I mean, in the 1912, 13, 14, they would openly admit in front of the Congress, we have no idea why you are there. We just don't know anything about Afghanistan. It is pure, sheer ignorance. Like that anthropologist Ahmed from Pakistan has that wonderful book about the thistle, and where he was kind of a governor in one provinces. And so he knows the reality. And he's an excellent anthropologist. He's saying, well, in Washington, they could know anything they want, but they just don't want to know. It is the passion for ignorance. So then ignorance substituted with fantasy, you have this kind of, so I think Biden with his dead son, he can relate to other many dead sons, like the 10 that, of those 10 he killed, he authorized the killing 29 August, 7 of them were children. He can relate to them and say that they all belong to the same human field, no? And so I think in that regard, that's the only hope we have, that in order to escape fantasy, somebody like Biden, and I guess we, through writing about this, through creating, organizing protest, we can break through this ignorance, which of course it is very difficult, because fantasy is not just a sheer dream or a sheer mythology that you can penetrate through. Fantasy becomes sort of constitutive of our own subjectivity, so who we are, and that fantasy becomes really harsh to penetrate, really difficult. So, but that's the only way. It is through the ignorance, the deliberate ignorance, and the deliberate not knowing the reality of this, that the public supports these atrocious things, and it allows what has been happening now. So in that regard, I mean, I guess that's all I had to say. Thank you.